Welcome everybody, and thanks for taking the time out of your morning or day, wherever you are, to meet with the team today and go through how Graphical Networks can make more of the information you're receiving. If we do some introductions, first of all, myself, Glenn Kershaw, Director of Sales here for EMEA and APJ for Loop One. Been with the company for 22 years now, and really pleased to introduce Fred and Jason, having known them for over 22 years, and can't believe that this is the first time that I've had the pleasure to meet them in the UK, and the first time of the numerous webinars we've done over the years that we're actually doing a webinar in the same office. So great to have you in the UK. So Fred, if you can just do a quick intro, please.
Sure, thanks, Glenn. So my name is Fred Koh. I'm the Director of Sales for Graphical Networks. As Glenn mentioned, we started Graphical Networks back in 2007. We launched our first software, I think like February 2009. So we've been doing this for quite some time. And thanks for having us. And then my colleague Jason sitting next to me. He's our Director of Customer Support. He handles a lot of the pre and post sales efforts at Graphical Networks, and he's also my lead sales engineer. So he is here to present our netTerrain product and how it interfaces or connects with SolarWinds. So thanks.
Thanks, Fred. Looking at some of the attendees we have on the call, again, some names I recognise and some new ones. So just a slide here really to set the scene. So many of you will know Loop One through our affiliation with SolarWinds, one of the leading ITOM providing toolset. But as we covered earlier on, we have a long-standing relationship with the team at Graphical Networks and with their product netTerrain, which, as I said, can take the information, can take the feed from the SolarWinds system and give you the ability to replicate, document in many ways, which Jason will highlight on the demo. But again, just for those that aren't aware, Loop One have been around for over 20 years, or a partner in the UK with SolarWinds for over 20 years, over 13 years out of our North American office, and again have a global reputation for being the SolarWinds partner to go to enhance your SolarWinds employment through the Loop One services. We're based in 5 locations worldwide, head office out of Austin, Texas in the US. EMEA office in the UK, Ireland and Germany, or EMEA offices, sorry, and our office in Sri Lanka. We are now over 100 plus global employees throughout those regions. Many of the customers we work with are on the Fortune 500 list, and through that we've done over 5,000 engagements since 2009. So well established SolarWinds partner. But really today is to get an understanding of what we can do with the information that SolarWinds provides, how we can then document the network to be able to get to the root cause of issues and understand how things hang together, whether that be through physical or through logical diagrams. But before I steal any thunder from Fred and Jason on the slides that they'll cover off, there are other product sets that we cover, as you can see on the top right hand of this screen, but ultimately today really is around how we can take the information from SolarWinds and give you a true graphical representation, and how that will be purposeful working with you and your team. So if I hand over to Fred to talk more around Graphical Networks and netTerrain.
Thanks, Glenn. All right, so the marriage between SolarWinds and netTerrain. So netTerrain is our flagship product for Graphical Networks. And many customers that have SolarWinds Orion, NPM, they do also use netTerrain to really enhance their SolarWinds product offering. So by all means, netTerrain is not a competitor of SolarWinds Orion. We're actually here to supplement and complement SolarWinds. So network documentation for us and for customers that do buy or use netTerrain, these use us really to help find information faster and quickly. SolarWinds does a great job in regards to monitoring your network. We do a really good job of documenting that, meaning that SolarWinds does a great job monitoring, sends you alerts, but we can propagate those alarms into netTerrain. But with netTerrain, you do a lot more than just seeing your network topology maps. So in addition to that, with netTerrain, you can track any IT asset management type information. So you can add many custom fields and attributes in netTerrain. You can customize the look and feel of the diagrams. You can also create more physical rack diagram type views as well. So you can put netTerrain both the logical type view of a network as well as more the physical. And the ability to search for information that much quicker. So a lot of our customers use netTerrain. Sorry, I'm going off a little tangent. More for IT asset management, the ability for capacity management, planning capacity for your networks, data centers. So that's what a lot of our customers that use SolarWinds with netTerrain use it for. So we're headquartered in Gaithersburg, Maryland, right outside Washington, D.C. As I mentioned before, our first software was launched in 2009. We have more than 400 organizations using netTerrain today. And you can see some of our UK customers in this slide here as well. The netTerrain itself is basically 3 tools in one. It's to really help manage your data centers, your networks, and also, which is our latest one, was the asset plants. So if you need help managing the fiber within your infrastructure, whether it's inside plants or outside the buildings, that's something you can do in netTerrain. So again, 3 tools in one. netTerrain itself can either be offered in cloud platform as well as on-prem. If it's on-prem, it is a Windows-based solution, so we do require Windows Server as well as Microsoft SQL Server for the backend. And here are some of our customers. As I mentioned, we have more than 400 organizations that use netTerrain. And here's some of our sample customers. Bell Mobility, which is our first customer back in 2009. They're still using netTerrain today. I think they have like more than 500,000 connections. Don't remember how many racks, but they use netTerrain to document all the cable infrastructure within all their data centers, as well as to manage all the data center capacity, space availability, and power availability. University of Iowa, they use us primarily to document their networks. And one good thing about netTerrain is that you have one centralized place to view all your documentation. So when a shift ends, another shift comes back on, they have the ability to use that same information, and they can also collaborate in netTerrain. So why netTerrain? Automated network documentation. So like SolarWinds, netTerrain does also have its own SMP network discovery engine, but this focus of this webinar is how do we connect to SolarWinds? So we do have a REST API connector that my colleague Jason will show you. So it connects to your SolarWinds, brings in everything for your nodes and connections, database, tables in SolarWinds, and we visualize and see that in netTerrain. So with netTerrain, we have a search feature where you can search for anything: IP address, MAC address, name of the equipment. You can search for it in netTerrain. It'll be that much quicker. So you have the ability to click on the device and see all the different data fields and attributes for that given device. So whether it's up to you, you can add as much data fields in any object. So a lot of our customers add additional fields like warranty expiration, contract dates, if it's under maintenance, who's the owner of the equipment, who are the customers associated with this device. So stuff that SolarWinds cannot discover, and you want to have the ability to document all that information about your network and the impact if that particular device goes down. Who are the users that are affected? Who are your customers that may be impacted? So that's how, again, how many of our customers use netTerrain today. So we'll show you our netTerrain collector. The netTerrain collector is part of the base offering for netTerrain. So it does all the automatic mapping, again, through SNMP or through our SolarWinds connector. And we also have hooks into other third-party connectors using our REST APIs. If people in this audience today use Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, or have CMDBs like Snow or Remedy, you can connect to those different data sources and bring that all into netTerrain.
Thanks, Fred. I think that certainly set the scene. So I guess without further ado, we can head over to Jason, who will share his screen and go through a demo, again, highlighting where we can take the information from SolarWinds and graphically represent that. So quick interchange on the headset and sharing the machine. So over to you, Jason.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks. Let me share my screen here. Just do the whole screen. Share. Share. All right. You guys should see my screen now. SolarWinds, great. Yeah, thanks, Jason. As Fred mentioned, do a lot of pre-sales, post-sales items here, sales engineering, helping installations and troubleshooting, support, etc. So that's all good. So first, netTerrain, as Fred mentioned, the Windows-based platform. So if you're going to host it yourself, you just need Windows and SQL Server. We do have a cloud offering as well. So if you prefer the cloud, we do offer that as an option. We kind of have two cloud offerings: our SaaS model environment, and then we also host based on, if you just want a machine set up in an AWS or Azure, we can do that as well. So, what is netTerrain? First and foremost, to use the software, you configure it, set it up. You go to a browser, and then you log in, user and password, gets you in the system. You can use Active Directory integration or Azure Active Directory, which I really like. The Azure Active Directory integrations is pretty seamless. AD works well as well, but Azure AD is kind of the up and coming thing. A lot of companies using that now, so that's good. Fred was alluding to, kind of when you're doing network documentation, there might be different sort of ways you do that. You might have different, sorry, I'm just adjusting my headset here. You might have logical drawings or physical drawings. So we can take advantage of information that you're gathering already out of SolarWinds and use that basically to do that or get that information in Discovery. So what does that look like, kind of thing? So I'm going to just drive down into some network documentation here, specifically a project that has sort of a nice hierarchy of information where you have, like, for instance, a map of data. Obviously, this isn't something where you're doing discovery. This is more where you're bringing in data maybe from an external data source that's not like a discoverable data source, like something like SNMP, right? So here you might have multiple locations, like I have a university location where I can double click and drill down and see things like the various buildings of the university and see interconnections, where you have something like conduit or fiber cables and strands and pits, etc., that you're going to document. Not everybody's going to go to this level of detail, but it's just kind of showing you some examples. More traditional things are going to be things like a wiring closet or something like a data center where you've got multiple cabinets, and inside cabinets you're going to have rack and stack equipment. So the reason I'm mentioning this, because this is where you sort of start to tie things back to something like SolarWinds, where you have data that you're discovering in a tool when you're doing monitoring and all these other things in SolarWinds, but you may not have extensive documentation along with it. SolarWinds certainly has some visualization tools, which are good, but if you do want to show things more in a hierarchy or more logical type drawings, then a tool like us can be a good fit, because you can leverage the data that you already have from SolarWinds Discovery and then bring that data across. And kind of how does that work, and what does it kind of look like, at least initially? Well, how it works is we have something called the collector, which I'll bring that up on the screen here. And our collector tool is basically a bunch of what we call connectors. Connectors are interfaces to other systems. So you can see a whole bunch of different ones here: AWS and Azure and SolarWinds and ServiceNow, etc. And typically the way these connectors work is we you go in and put a user and password in, and we're using the APIs from whatever the tool happens to be most of the time. So, for instance, with SolarWinds, thinking ServiceNow. SolarWinds, you have your user and password that you put in, and you put in the REST API endpoint for the system, SolarWinds, and you do a connection. And then it goes out and collects data. Specifically, we're looking at what we refer to as the node object types, or the nodes table from SolarWinds. It's really the assets, right? So switches and routers and things that are discoverable via SNMP traditionally. So instead of doing another SNMP discovery, why not leverage what you have, which in this case is your SolarWinds data. You're already collecting that, you're already monitoring, you already have this data, which is great. So let's take that data and let's connect it to our netTerrain server, which is basically what you have here. You have your settings, you do your connections, test everything out, push data, and then the data comes across to netTerrain. And I'll show you kind of the difference here in just a second. But I'll mention too, so a lot of the questions are about scheduling, how often do you do this and that kind of thing. So it's not a one-time process. Typically you set it up where you pull data once, and then you have it go out and check and see if there's new data on a regular basis or if there's any updates. So you can do scheduling for that as well, or you can bring it across one time, but that's not typically how you would want to do that. So you leverage the data, you already have SolarWinds, connect to it, you pull the data across through our connector, gets pushed into the netTerrain system, which is back over here. So let me look at some collector data here. We'll go into SolarWinds. And what I have on my screen here might look a little bit familiar. This is sort of a screenshot from a SolarWinds test system we had in our environment, where we've done a discovery of some machines in our lab test environment. And I just did a screenshot to kind of show the SolarWinds and what it looks like. And it obviously does a very good job of discovering devices, showing you connectivity and various other things. It doesn't necessarily show you the device itself or the type, at least visually. And what we allow you to do is take that information and then put it into the netTerrain system, sort of in that hierarchy. So you have that physical location or logical location. So after you do a discovery, you bring the data across, but you also do what's called basically a type mapping, where you are bringing across the objects from SolarWinds, but you're also going to use actual our device types, where you are mapping them to a specific physical object or device types. Let me remove that background so this makes more sense. So instead of just having an object that looks like a circle and it's represented by a sort of more generic switch, now we're converting it into an actual object type. And we do that really based on the object ID that gets discovered from the device type. So the object ID. So we can do a mapping to our catalog of actual device types. And what does that do for you? Well, you could leave it just as is, but you kind of already have that in SolarWinds. But if you want to show an object and represent that object from the standpoint of, I want this to be here, but I also want it to be in a logical drawing, and I want it to be in a physical, let's say the hierarchy as well, I can do that too. I can take an object and go, oh, I know this thing belongs in this data center or this wiring closet. Let me go to that data center wiring closet and actually add it in. So as an example, I'll just jump down into here, and I'm going to add an object, and I'm just going to do what we call an alias. I could also cut and move the object too, but I can alias over into a physical location. So now I have it in a physical location, but I also have it in the logical location. I could also tie this object where I have links directly back to SolarWinds and have that connectivity as well to be able to kind of switch or move from one system to another pretty quickly too. So again, you're going back to the point of being able to use the data that you already have to help save you time if you do need sort of another way of visualizing or viewing your documentation or enhancing what you currently have. You can obviously leverage that SolarWinds data to help you do that. So I guess I want to see if there's any questions, or if there's anything else I can certainly answer with what I've talked about so far, since I've been kind of droning on a bit for a few minutes there. Oh yeah, Fred was telling me talk about the searches because he did mention the search. So one of the things about netTerrain is when the data is in the system is you can do full searching. At the top there's a search bar, but I can also bring up the search tool through pressing the letter S. You basically put in parameters. You can do like less than and greater than and some other search parameters as well. Where you can do this diagram or sub diagrams or whatever the case may be and do a search. And what's nice is it searches across the whole project for whatever data that you're looking for to help you identify that. So do a search, find, and then you can go back and identify the information depending on what it is. So if this were a different name, some sort of DNS name, I'll just make something up here. Copy that, right? Search. How long the search is going to take. I'm going to have it search across the whole project. Shouldn't take too long, I don't think. But it'll go out and do a search the database of all the information, find out some sort of match. If there's a match, found a match, then you can do show on diagram, and that'll take you back to that object and then basically flash on the screen. So it's an easy way to navigate through your project as well, which is always nice. Now, because we're obviously leverage data from SolarWinds, but if you have data from other systems too, you can bring that across and kind of have one place where you have all this data kind of coming together. ServiceNow is kind of a big area of interest these days as well. So just so you know. The data fields on the left-hand side, those can all come from the system that you're discovering from, or that data can be populated manually, or maybe you have another system like things like expiration date. So if you knew that there was something down the road that you wanted to keep track of, you can certainly do that. You have the ability to do reports. We have reporting modules actually. You have tools in the tools where you can build query reports that you can build and then have sort of refer back to, where I can come in here and do something like a maintenance report and load that up. So if there is maintenance data, I can bring that and get a report and list, and those can be exported to CSV or Excel and so on. So, all right. Anything else, Fred? Okay. All right. If there's any other questions, please let us know. Thanks.
On that, Jason, while I have you there, a lot of the clients on the call already will have SolarWinds, so they're already part way there. Okay, they've got the data, they've got the information in the SQL database, so the information is there. What would you say are some of the advantages to doing that? Because I know over the years of working with yourselves, documentation has always been the job that's always, we'll get round to it, or we'll get it done, and it's always something that I guess is forgotten. So I don't know if you've just got a bit of time there just to go through really the advantage of taking the information that SolarWinds is supplying and why we need to document it.
Well, I think you sort of the nail on the head, so to speak, which is most people with documentation projects, everybody wants to do documentation. Typically you go, okay, in IT, I want to do documentation. Maybe I don't want to, but see the need for doing documentation. The problem is it becomes sort of the thing that is always pushed off to the side because of other projects that come up. You know, we have to do a replacement project of routers or switches or whatever it happens to be, and network documentation kind of falls to the side. So you need to automate as best as you can and as much as you can if you are going to do network documentation. There's kind of two things that go hand in hand with sort of successful network documentation. One is automation, as much as you can. Automation from the standpoint of let's leverage and use data that we currently have. So you already have data. You've got SolarWinds. So let's take that and leverage that and bring that data across. You may have data in Excel sheets, which is fine. You can do some automation with those types of things too, or other systems where you have data that you can leverage for your network documentation. You want to look at all those things and automate as much as you can. That's why we have the connectors and the collector to help you guys do that with automation. So the other side to this is process and procedure. You have to have good processes in place. I mean, I'd be the first to tell you if you're not thinking through the process of how to keep things up to date on a regular basis and how to maintain a project like a network documentation project, there's really no reason to start, because if you're not going to do that and have that in place, it will fail very quickly, I assure you. And I guess really the third thing with that is just defining the scale and the scope. You don't want to define it too many things in a network documentation project. Like the things I showed you where it's very deep and you're going down to a lot of data, a lot of hierarchy. I mean, you can get down to port level wall jacks and things like that. That's too much as a definition for starting a project. Usually you want to start it off with, let's just do some logical network documentation and drawings, and maybe put them in a physical location for the things that are like core to our infrastructure, core routers or core switches, those types of things. So it's always the majority of the items that you're touching all the time. Those are the things that you really need to get into and document, I think, and have a good sort of handle on. I didn't mention this. I mean, you also have the power aspect to this as well. So if you need to document things like power, PDUs, certainly those are things you can do in the tool too. So those might come into the project, but
change management processes. Let's talk about how some requests do it.
Yeah, Fred was just alluding to change management as well. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a big thing these days too, is that whole change management of, how are you going to do things? I think this speaks back to the processes, procedures that you have in place as well. I mean, a lot of companies, especially big companies, have change management processes in place already and procedures. So this can fit into that, as part of that process. Not only getting data automatically, but when a change does occur, knowing that you have to also update your documentation. So anyway, I hope that helps.
Thanks, Jason. I think also just covering off earlier, just to be clear, you mentioned around Excel and other connectors that you can use. So we can take multiple feeds in. So
Yeah.
It could be Excel, it could be SolarWinds, it could be a ServiceNow. So I mean, can we just be clearer or just cover that as well?
Yeah, you can do all these feeds at one time if you need to, or if you have them. SolarWinds obviously is a big sort of feed with a lot of our customers. ServiceNow is certainly the other big one we discuss and talk about with customers. So you could have them both running, or multiple feeds running for that matter, from different connectors, or in addition doing things like the Excel import as well. So, but yeah, you can definitely bring in data from different feeds at the same time, and again, down that path of as much automation as you can. We also have full sets of APIs ourselves. So if you want to do things programmatically from the standpoint of pushing data in, or read or write, or whatever the case may be, we do have a full APIs for that too.
Thanks, Jason. And I guess from one other thing, with SolarWinds, we know that we've got a lot of the data there. We've got a lot of the information on that, and we know NetVis will then visually represent that. I guess a question to ask is, what would be the main benefits of getting closer to what we would class as fully automated documentation, right? Because yes, there is still a small manual element, and I think there always will be. I guess while we're on the planet, manual element, maybe that would change. But what would the real advantage be to using the automation of pulling from SolarWinds, ServiceNow, other tools into netTerrain versus having it in PowerPoint, or I mean Visio? Is Visio still?
Visio is still a thing, sure.
Okay.
Excel is probably the biggest where people seem to document things, is Excel. Some in Visio. I don't see it as much anymore. I think it's hard to do network documentation in Visio anymore. A lot of people still try and do it. It's just, I don't know, it seems like a lot of work. There's a lot of online tools you can use too for documentation now that weren't available obviously 10 or 15 years ago. So you can do those types of things too. I think, well, one big advantage, of course, is from the standpoint of the data, leveraging what you have, of course, automation and time and all those things, but also trusted data source. It's one of those things where SolarWinds, you trust the data, you've been using it for a long time, you understand it's correct, or it's correct, or at least for the majority of the time, it would be correct data. So trusted data is important, because then if you're bringing it across, the data, the source, and it's going to be good and correct. And that's a big thing, because you'll find a lot of folks will talk to and be like, well, we use Excel sometimes or Visio sometimes, but it's not always up to date. And so we don't really use it that much anymore because we don't trust it. And you can see the path it follows. You know, they had a big effort for doing documentation, then it kind of over time it just slowly starts to go away, and then it very quickly doesn't get updated because nobody trusts it at some point. So that's one aspect of it. With respect to the data. But why a tool like ours? I think it's flexible. We try and keep the tool very flexible, so you don't need us to do things for you, like add a data field into your database to collect data about object types. Those are all things that can be driven through the GUI. Adding objects to the catalog, you don't need us to do that. You can create your own object types in our catalog as well. The data fields, go in there and add, and there's really no limitation on the number of the data fields. The hierarchy that I showed, where you start at a very high level and work your way down, that's all user definable. We don't say you have to do these things. You can go in there and say, oh, I'm going to use a building and a floor, and then a different place. You may not use a building at all. You may just put some sort of device, you know, on a map or something like that, where again, no specific fixed type hierarchies for us. So pretty flexible tool, pretty easy to use, I think, especially you know, we offer classes and things like that, but even just going through our documentation, we have pretty good documentation, so you can get started on your own. And you don't have to buy something, you know, at the top with us. You can say, oh, I want to start off with a sort of a smaller piece of netTerrain with a certain number of objects. So if there's only certain things you want to bring across from SolarWinds, you can do that. You say, okay, I want to bring across, you know, 500 of my core routers or switches, and start there, and then maybe over time add more, or maybe you don't. Maybe you just stick with sort of that that model. So pretty flexible from that standpoint too.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, thank you.
We, looking at the client list, we have quite a few private sector clients, but quite a few college and university and NHS clients. So can you just talk to why we see so many universities, colleges, NHS clients take up netTerrain?
Yeah, I think especially in the case of things like universities, universities, of course, you know, as I was showing in my project, they have usually multiple buildings, a lot of equipment, and also they have oftentimes their own infrastructure from the standpoint of things like fiber cables, and that have a lot of fiber strands they need to track, those types of things. So we're a pretty good fit for those use cases, because we can cover things like fiber cables, fiber strands, inside plant, outside plant, power, and data connections all in one tool. And again, with the integrations and things like that, I think it's also helpful. But for the most part, yeah, we have a lot of universities using the tool, and I think that's been a big part of the reason it's been a good fit, because they do have these, you know, kind of small cities unto themselves as far as what they need to document. And I think we've just in that space, it's been a good tool to use from that standpoint. And that's true for some of the other things you had mentioned too. I mean, we have a lot of different you know, users that, where if they do have sort of multiple buildings, you know, you talk about NHS or any kind of healthcare services and things like that, it's usually, again, multiple buildings. They have a lot of wiring closets. They might have a small data center or a large data center. You need to document all those things, and I think we're, again, a good fit for those. And cities too. Yeah. We have a lot of different areas where we kind of fit into. I mean, really anybody with an IT network, whether it's small or large, that's usually a pretty good fit. Because again, I go back to it's a pretty flexible tool when you get into using it.
Yeah, and I think when you can see a rack fully populated within netTerrain, if an engineer is going to a site for the first time, to actually be able to look at the rack in netTerrain and know they're actually looking at the same rack when they're on site, I think is key as well. And again, we have the ability to look at the power, as you said earlier. We can look at the use space in the racks, and can we alert to that to know that if we're out of capacity in a rack or we're high on power. So again, just to cover on that area, that how deep and granular we can get with netTerrain.
Yeah, for sure. So let me drive down into this project a little bit. So when you're looking at something like cabinets, now cabinets for us aren't, when you're looking at a cabinet, it's like when you're looking in Visio where you see a cabinet in the elevation right away. For us, it's usually a rectangular object represents the cabinet. And that's because you're kind of looking down over top of the data center or wiring closet in this case, and you see all the different color objects, these are all different cabinets, different colors. And that's because right now I'm looking at these cabinets based on rack utilization. So on the left-hand side, it's going to show me or tell me, how many rack units are available for the cabinet, how much power is assigned to the cabinet, am I over power, and even weight for that matter. So it's going to show you that. That's automatically dated based on the equipment that's in the cabinet. So as you rack mount equipment, it'll automatically make those calculations for you, which is good. But if you do go into the cabinet level detail, you obviously can see the rack elevation of the equipment, see the equipment and how it's mounted. I mean, equipment for us is, we try and make it sort of match, obviously, the equipment that the model itself. And if it's got cards or slots for cards, you can put your cards in and bring those across, so you can drag and drop and add a card and that kind of thing. So, which is always, again, you're trying to build an environment that's kind of like as built for your environment. So when you're looking at your documentation, it's reflecting upon what you truly have out in the field, which helps you make decisions, right? Because now you can know when you have a new project come along, I need to investigate, where am I going to put this equipment? Okay, well, where do I have rack space? Well, visually, I can go look at cabinets and go, well, obviously I have a bunch of green cabinets probably empty. And I can go in and go, okay, well, I can put equipment in here if obviously it's empty. But you can run reports too and do capacity reports based on power or rack utilization, those types of things. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jason. Okay, just 2 more slides to finish off. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully you'll be able to see my screen now. So Fred, I don't know if you want to just talk quickly to Bell. We touched on it earlier on, just the fact they've been a user for so many years, or Jason, do you want to just talk to how they've grown?
I'll talk. So we don't have to switch headsets here. So Bell, big company in Canada. I mean, you're talking about a large telecom company, right? All of Canada. So you can imagine how large of an organization, how many pieces of equipment. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000, 300,000 pieces of equipment and 500,000 connections, thousands of racks and so on. So we've been working with Bell for many years. Successful projects. They have folks that are really kind of in charge of the documentation, a lot of engineers out in the field that feed data back into the groups that are part of the IT department. 200 users. Yeah, 200 plus users of the documentation as well. Yeah, full-time person doing documentation too. So it's very important for them, and for it's hard when you're a large organization like that, but even small organizations, it's hard to make decisions about your network without knowing what you have out there. Right. So having that documentation for them is really key and critical to making decisions about, again, simple things like, hey, where are we going to put a piece of equipment, to how are we going to connect it? And do we need to plan on new capacity down the road? Obviously, capacity is a big deal because, if you start running out of rack space in your data center or wiring closet, it's not like you can just go, oh, just add another cabinet. Well, no, not if you don't have the room for the cabinet or the power for the cabinet and those types of things. So you need to kind of start to think out long term, and it's hard to do that without good documentation, I think. So.
Yeah, I think if you don't have good discovery and good documentation, how can you manage what you don't know you have, right? So key there. Yeah, exactly. So I think this sort of case study is key to scalability and shows that netTerrain is an enterprise tool. But again, just to reiterate that we do have some smaller clients that are out there using the product as well. So it's versatile across the SME sector, but also the enterprise.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have customers that might have 100 pieces of equipment and then all the then ones, of course, up to the size of somebody like Bell, which are 250,000 pieces of equipment. So that speaks back to the flexibility of the tool. So it can be used really in any organization from that standpoint, whether you're a small org or a very large organization.
Fantastic, thank you. So I guess here is if you want to see netTerrain in action, then we have the ability there. If you go to loop1.com/netTerrain, you can click in there and enter netTerrain, and we'll be able to set up a personalized demo. I don't know if Helen, do you have anything to add to that?
No, other than Glenn, there was a couple of questions we had that came in, which some of them we may well have addressed, Jason, as you went through the demo, but I think it's obviously just worth asking those as they were submitted. So we had one that said, within SolarWinds, do you need to be monitoring the interfaces, or is it done by dependencies?
That's up to you. If you're doing the interfaces, we can take advantage of that, but it can be just the base devices too. I think it depends on how you've configured your SolarWinds and what you're currently discovering. But we don't really have a requirement there whether you have to do one or the other. We're pulling the data from the data that you're currently discovering via SNMP.
Okay, and then another one was with authentication. Is it Azure or AD, or can you have a mixture of both?
It's Active Directory or Azure Active Directory. I don't think you can mix the two. I think you have to pick one or the other, I believe. I'd have to double check on that, but I haven't seen somebody mix both. Usually it's one or the other. So we do support MFA, either MFA through your Azure Active Directory or AD, or MFA directly through netTerrain, where a user can configure MFA and use something like a Google Authenticator app.
All right, and then one final question: does it pick up devices that are stacked?
Yeah, you can do stacked devices. So for the last year or so, we've been working on some of the stacked switches, like from Cisco, Juniper. I think there were a couple others that are pretty heavy into doing the stacked switches. So when it does a discovery, Juniper, I think I mentioned that. So yeah, we should be able to support those stacked switches as well.
Okay, just a final couple of questions from my side, just to customers' understanding of licensing. So how is netTerrain licensed?
Yeah, we're kind of object-based. Objects for us are like your switches, your base switches and routers, chassis, racks, hierarchy to a certain extent. But that's kind of how we're licensed. It's relatively straightforward. We don't license down to things like ports or cards. Those we just consider as part of the base chassis. So those are things that are not part of the counts. Same with connections. So links like an Ethernet cable or fiber cable and strands, we don't count any of those things in our licensing. Yeah, that's the primary. There's also the user counts too, but that kind of depends on what we call the editor counts, not so much the read-only users, especially if you're hosting things yourself.
Yeah, so the users there are just the people that are going to have an active interest in changing the documentation. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
And system requirements?
Hosting it yourself, Windows Server, SQL Server backend database. We have a requirements document you can download. It's really not, you don't need a whole lot. I see a lot of folks that'll typically set up like a 4 virtual CPU on VMware with, 8 gig of RAM or 12 gig of RAM, things like that to get started, try things out. So it just depends on the number of users too, concurrency, things like that. But if you don't have a lot of concurrency, that's kind of the big driving factor on how much hardware and resources you need.
Okay, thank you. Just seen a quick question come in there for cloud deployment, if we can just touch on that.
Yeah, cloud deployment, we kind of have 2 flavors. We have netterrain.us, where you just go and sign up and it creates an instance for you, and then you can log in and start using it. And then we also do cloud deployment, like if you said, hey, we want you guys to host it, but we have this special environment and we need to do certain things, then we can launch an instance for you in Azure or AWS and manage it from there. Sometimes we do that also depending on the number of users and some other things involved, and how you want, how big the system might be, growing. We may not do that in our netTerrain US environment. So it just depends.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Helen, any other questions that I've missed your side?
Not that I can see, Glenn, no.
Okay, well, we're just 2 minutes over. So from my perspective, I'd just like to offer a thank you for everyone on the call for attending. And again, special thanks to Fred and Jason for coming over to the UK, and great to see you, and thank you for participating in today's webinar. Helen,
Thanks
any
for
final
having
thoughts
us.
from yourself?
Nope, just again, thank you to Fred and to Jason. Thank you, Glenn, for hosting today. Just a quick reminder, if you could complete the feedback survey as you exit the webinar today, and the recording should be with you in 48 hours. And yes, you will get a copy of the presentation slides as well.
Fantastic. As always, thank you, Helen, for sorting the event. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody, for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
all.